You won't believe what happened at 36,000 feet. If high-altitude mysteries keep you hooked, subscribe to The Story Beyond the Impact and hit the bell. New chilling cases every week. My name is Noah Cade, first officer on a 7879 that, on paper, was allergic to surprises. The airplane wore software like armor, load alleviation function, gust suppression, smart flaperons that trimmed out bumps so gently most passengers never learned the word EDR. Nights like this, I trusted those pages more than sleep. We departed after midnight on a southbound long haul, skirting a winter jet that had sharpened its teeth over the mountains. Dispatch had rerouted us around a patchwork of SIGMETs for severe CAT. The new plan kept us on the clean side of the core, step climb to FL 390, maybe FL 410 later if temps allowed. I pulled the latest ACAR's Turbulence plot. The EDR colors bled like bruises across the map, but our lane threaded between them. CPDLC was up. Vanav CRZ smiled its indifferent little smile. We set Turben 1 as a precaution, seatbelts on, told the purser to keep the galleys locked until we felt the airplane's mood. At FL 380, the SATCOM chirped. Selkal from dispatch with an update. Wave activity building east of track, tops uncertain. My captain raised an eyebrow. Uncertain is not a number, he said, and we eased 5 degrees west to give the Andes a wider berth later. The weather radar was quiet, no water to paint this high, so we lowered tilt and toggled WX+T anyway, chasing ghosts. The screen gave us nothing except our own superstition. First ripples arrived as a cat's paw, plus 0.1 G, 0.2 G, the kind of bumps the composite shell swallowed like a polite cough. I made the call on PA, light chop expected, remain seated. In the cabin, the aisle lights dimmed to mood, a soft galaxy of dots leading to lav doors like small exits to saner worlds. The 787's bones hummed at the frequency that usually means everything is fine. But the wind field wasn't reading the memo. The jet streak curved like a blade out of the west and began to slide under us. The headwind ticked up. 145, 162, 178 knots. OAT nudged colder. Tate lied, like it always does in cruise, but the numbers we live by started to crowd. A small orange cherry lit on the ICAS, seat belts on, already set, and went out again. Then came the voice that wasn't a voice. You learn to ignore pareidolia in static. Your brain loves making words from white snow, but this didn't come over VHF or HF or guard. It threaded the side tone, the soft self-echo we hear when we key the mic. I hadn't keyed anything. Still, the cockpit filled with a breath that tasted like ozone and cold pennies, and something in it said 2 syllables that didn't belong to any checklist. Down, now. I glanced at the captain. His jaw squared, but he kept his hands open. Guard is quiet, he said, and tuned 121.5 out of respect. Silent. I checked the ACARS feed. Nearby traffic had reported OCNL Modchop, OCNL Sev at FL 340360 over the ridge, EDR 4552. Not hell, not yet. We threaded between cares and numbers. Tropopause sagged on the model, a cold hook diving toward our altitude, mountain wave icons, the innocuous little sine curves on the chart stacked along the range like vertebrae. I asked for FL 360 to thicken the air 2,000 feet. ATC approved with the unromantic grace only Datalink can manage. We started down slowly, VS 500 ATHR riding steady. The first negative G tickle came just under FL 370. Drinks lifted on some tray I couldn't see, and an overhead latch whispered. The airplane corrected like a yoga breath. LAF flexed the ailerons and eased the load. ICAS stayed bored. I said, "That's it?" And the sky, which has a sense of humor, answered. We hit the rotor. There's no panel message for this. The jet cleared its throat sideways. Lateral shear smacked our tail. The nose nodded a quarter degree. The wings gulped uneven air. The cabin thumped like we'd driven over a sleeping god. Plus 1.6G, then 0.4, then plus 1.8. Not numbers that break things, but enough to shake belief. Trays clattered. In the aft galley, something heavy tried to remember momentum. The purser chimed us, voice quiet and wide. We're secure, but the air is wrong. The captain gave me the look. Your leg, my sky. And I set a shallower descent, hand on the thrust levers, ready to dampen anything the automation didn't like. The PFD was clean, the FMA proud, VNAV PTH, AT, CMD. The airplane was still faithfully pretending wind is just numbers. But every second stretched. Headwind, 185. Tailplane felt like it wanted to sing. The ram air hiss took on a ragged vowel, as if the nose held a vowel it couldn't pronounce. Then the purser said a sentence I hate for its accuracy. The aisle is narrower, cabins don't shrink, but fear makes angles. I nodded into the interphone anyway. Locked and seated, it'll pass. She didn't answer yes. She said, copy, like people do when their bodies don't believe. The overspeed clacker coughed once, the wrong laugh at the wrong time. We were nowhere near MMO. The gust had simply shoved us along a tiny stair step. The captain tapped the baro knob like that could keep fate from tapping back. Another 2,000, he asked. FL 340. Approved, came ATC again, voice asleep and planet wide away, and we turned down. Between FL 360 and FL 350, the air spoke again. Not words exactly, infrasound maybe, not in the headset, in the vents. I tasted desert dust, I tasted hot rain. A low-frequency note rose in the shell, organized and ugly, and the wings muttered, don't the way a dog mutters hun when a door moves by itself. The 787 had learned to tame bumps. The bumps had learned back. I told myself everything rational. Rotor beneath wave, tropfold, a bad night in the shear layer. Still, I tightened my harness and checked the Oxwey page like a pilgrim touching a relic. Cabin altitude steady, DP happy, PAX in norm, PAX don't care about ghosts. I don't either, I lied. Then the sky tore. It wasn't the fuselage. It was the air tearing in front of us, the sound of canvas ripping, huge and close, as if a curtain had been yanked off a stage at the end of the world. The nose pitched down half a degree, which is a lover's nudge in jet language, but the G spike punched plus 2.2, then 0.6, so fast my vision vignetted and the cabin wailed. For a sliver of time, the stars in my window were below us. VNAV kicked, AT trimmed, LAF worked like a saint, and the airplane caught itself, but not before the wrong drawer somewhere leapt and the wrong latch somewhere learned what failure sounds like. Masks? The captain asked, and I hated that I didn't know whether he meant the passengers or us. Not yet, I said. Not yet. The vents sighed once more, and the breath in them said down again, as if the night itself were a controller with an unpublished restriction. We rolled wings level into air that pretended to be normal. For the rest of that minute, nothing happened, and in that nothing was the beginning of a story we wouldn't know how to end. There are moments in turbulence where the airplane becomes all hands. Yours, the captain's, the software's, the hands of whoever riveted this skeleton into a winged instrument. Past FL 350, that's where we entered. A quartet of hands trying to keep time while the drummer quit. We asked for FL 320. ATC had other traffic layered like pastry below. They gave us FL 330 with a 1-0 right to keep us off a wake the TCAS never painted. The jet outside veered. The jet inside, the one of vectors and hope, kept singing straight. I briefed the cabin. We're descending to find smoother air, crew seated. The purser answered, in the past tense. Are seated. The next pulse wasn't vertical. It was torsion, a twist you feel in bones you don't own. The yaw damper wrote tiny poems with the rudder. The thrust hunted a hare. The load alleviation flexed again, and I had a foolish thought. If the computers had voices, they would be chanting hold. Instead, The only voice came from the plastic sky above row 30, that gentle blizzard of conditioned air, and it whispered as if names lived in the molecules. It said mine. I've been called Noah by ATC in accents that could butter mountains, by flight attendants who learned my coffee in one leg, by captains who made it a curse in simulators. The sound that arrived now wasn't any of that. It was Noah, as if the ceiling itself had grandparents. I glanced back through the door window on a reflex older than logic. A passenger in 34A had their lips parted like a fish in clear water, eyes unfocused, and a string from the PSU danced like needle rain. The purser rose a centimeter and then remembered gravity as a hobby, sat down. The captain didn't look at me. "Focus forward," he said, and it wasn't correction, it was church. I brought my eyes home to the PFD. Mach 84, winds 195 on the nose, OAT 56. All the numbers are lie in the way that only honest numbers can lie. We were fine until we weren't. Overspeed clacker coughed again, this time a full syllable, because a gust had punched the tape upward like a bully's thumb on a ruler. The captain eased the nose, and I eased the thrust AT in, but modest. We shaved muck and lived. The buffet band stayed a rumor. Then luggage found its ancestral calling in the overheads to attempt escape. A bin arm cammed and failed somewhere aft, bang like a door in a storm, and the cabin reeked of the odd sweet of spilled cola and the tinny tang of a coin battery torn free of something that mattered to its owner. No screams, just a lot of human juggling, breath, prayer, seatbelt webbing, a mother's triangle of arms around a child, a stranger's flat palm bracing the headrest in front as if he could steady the air. "Masks?" the captain asked again, and the Ox-Y page still called us liars. Cabalt 7.6 DP 8.0, pax satisfied. He shook his head once, not no to me, no to the sky, and the airplane hit the wall. That's what it felt like, a sheer wall, invisible and stone. 2.5 G, instruments crisp as glass, a brief brownout at the edges of vision, ears filling. The HUD ladder hopped like a heart. We rode the step and then dropped off it into a weird, syrupy weightlessness that wasn't fun, not even a little, because it came with the metallic laughter of cutlery and gasps clamped between teeth. 0.7 G, long enough to pull the stomach off its hook, then plus 1.9 hard enough to staple it back. "Speed intervene," the captain said, and I wound speed down a tick, trading schedule for sanity. The jet core roared left on the map. The mountain wave icon on the tablet put a hand on our shoulder anyway. I saw the logic of rotor, rolling eddies beneath the clean sign, air tumbling off the ridgeline like a river squeezing between stones. We were a leaf asking nicely. And then the strange thing saved us from a worse thing. The infrasound in the vents, call it superstition, call it physics with a mask, rose an octave right before each hit. It gave us half a second of knowing. I began to fly that. When the breath sharpened, I preloaded the yoke, held thruster hair, let the auto everything do its perfect best with a human's dirty hint on top. The captain saw what I was seeing without words and matched pressure. 2 hands, 1 airplane, 1 rumor of a demon in the air telling us how to duck. We came through FL 340 with the kind of unanimity only terror writes, both pilots and 6 programs agreeing on down. ATC blessed FL 320 at last. We took it like a gift you apologize for accepting. The EDR map on the screen bled uglier to our east, a bruise blooming. To our west it smiled a little, mod only, and an old PIREP string hinting smoother. We asked for a 10 left. The controller said, approved, with the serenity of someone whose weather is 1,200 miles away. The cabin creaked like an old ship. The airplane moaned once, a long note through the frame that wasn't protest so much as remembering. Somewhere aft, a person laughed the way people laugh at funerals, a hiccup of relief and error. The purser called low, "We have injuries minor, a cut, a bruise, no oxygen deployed. The aisle..." She hunted for a word that wouldn't embarrass either of us. "Feels wrong, like it wants to lean." I wanted to tell her that aisles don't lean, that her inner ear was doing what inner ears do when G forgets manners. "We're descending to denser air," I said instead. "Stay put." The vents sighed one more time and the ceiling let me go, not by giving back my name, names are sticky, but by pronouncing the word the jet had been trying to say all along. Below, we broke into FL 320 as if it were a new country. The bumps didn't stop, they civilized. 0.4, 0.2, the usual argument between atmosphere and mass. The headwind dropped 20 knots. The model's trop line climbed a smidge. Satcom chimed with a nearby flight's PIREP. Mod 7 at 360, smooth 320, 300, OCC mod rotors west. The captain let go of a breath he'd been renting. "We live here now," he said and smiled without humor, but the airplane was not finished with its sermon. Over the ridgeline's last dark spine, the weather radar bloomed a phantasm we couldn't explain. No returns, and yet a curtain of static on the scope, as if the air itself had texture. The vents went quiet. The infrasound stopped. A different warning took its place. Silence so complete my ears rang. "That's worse," I said. He nodded. "Yeah." We flew the quiet for 3 long minutes. The cabin calmed because people calm when motion makes sense again. I did not calm. In the absence of that whisper, I had nothing to time the next step against. It came, of course, when I was almost grateful. A jolt, short, rude, like the table tapping your knee. No G spike on the plot, no change on the tapes, just the sound of the composite shell clicking somewhere it had never clicked before. The captain and I looked at the same blank spot on the bulkhead and didn't see the same thing. "Structural?" he said, not because he believed it, but because you say the worst thing first, so it stops being shy. "Panel," I said, because that's how you keep monsters small, name them after plastic. We were both wrong, but we wouldn't learn why until later, when the inspectors would run their hands along a seam no one knew was a seam, and the story would change tense. For now, we flew the denser air like it was a promise we intended to keep. The ceiling didn't say my name again. It had taught me the rhythm and left. The jet ahead crooked a finger. The mountains behind exhaled. ATC cleared us onward with the kind of boredom I envied. We were alive in the way people are alive when the second shoe is still up there, wondering how to fall. When your instruments say within limits, but your body says something fundamental just changed, which do you trust first? And why? At FL 320, the world should have felt heavier and kinder. It didn't. The numbers calmed. The air did not. Somewhere aft, metal ticked like a baseboard heater. 1, 2, 3, then stopped, the way a house quiets when it decides to keep its secrets. I logged it out loud so my brain wouldn't push it into myth. "Unidentified click aft," I said for the CVR that would, with luck, never matter. The captain grunted a yes without time to spare. We squared away fuel for a potential diversion. West was ocean and long runways. East was terrain and the story unfolding. I built a box around 2 alternates and sent the company a SATCOM scratch. Ride deteriorating over ridge. Request winds EDR below 300. A cars returned with a mosaic of PIREPs that argued with each other like cousins. Smooth 300, 320, Modsev 340, 360, rotor west of crest. The map began to look like a field of trapdoors. We went Turb N1 again and let the airplane find its version of penetration speed. On the 787, that's less a single number than a choreography. Auto throttle holds a target, gust suppression, and LAF do ballet with the wings. The long flex of composite buys you time. We were spending that time like gamblers. The next sound wasn't a click, it was a zip. A soft, zipper-fast run of something sliding a few inches under skin and then stopping. The captain and I looked at each other with the same polite terror. "Panel?" he said. "Insulation shift," I lied, because that's a smaller monster. The cabin press page stayed textbook, DP 8.0, Cabalt 7.6, outflow not hunting, packs in norm, but there was a quiver in the needle you feel with your eyes. 0.1 up, 0.1 down. Nothing a manual would call a thing, everything a body would. I asked the purser soft, Smell anything odd? Warm plastic? Sweet? She sniffed the air with a pro's contempt. I smell aluminum, she said, which is impossible and also not. The wind went cross-grained. The ridgeline below took a different shape on the IR camera, a black serrated edge that looked like a mouth inventing consonants. ATC approved 10 left to leave the turbine of misery behind faster. We traded a sliver of fuel for a fuller rumor of smooth. The HUD ladder behaved. The FMA was still VNAV PTH, CMD AT, grinning like a salesman. Then the side tone returned. Not a voice, not words, just breath. And in that breath, a suggestion. Hold. It wasn't the down from before. It was a demand for stillness, which the sky found funny. A rotor shouldered up out of nowhere, ba 1.9 G, and a slap sideways that made the rudder write calligraphy. The yaw damper and my foot did the same job. 0.5 followed like a punchline. A dozen stomachs lost their place in the queue. Overhead bins rattled like dice. Someone said, "Oh God," with the sincerity of an atheist, and meant it. We stayed right on the ragged lip of control feels ordinary. The zip came again. This time I placed it, crown panel somewhere in the 36 block of rows. A thin, fast slither, as if fabric batted against a beam and snuck past. Numbers didn't move. My spine did. I saw my hands go through the motions, scan, buffets, ICAs, raw data on the ND, while a separate me stood in the aisle under that panel and stared, waiting for something I did not want named. The captain said it for me. Divert. No bravado. We're spending luck at a rate I don't like. I built the route, direct to the coastal field, a long slab of light with ILS both ends and a tower that had heard too many apologies. ATC cleared it like they were happy to give us to a calmer sky. We calculated landing weight, set auto brake 3, briefed no reverse idle until straight, flaps per the book, the quiet four-step that keeps fear in the corner. I pinged the company, diverting due severe rotor indications, possible cabin panel issue, crew and packs belted, injuries minor. The purser counted injuries in the language of inventory. 1 cut eyebrow, 2 bruises, 1 scared, 1 praying. I told her to stay seated like prayer with better posture. She said, the ceiling above 35 is breathing. Not a thing people say, the right thing tonight. The airwave lowered another key. The infrasound in the vents rose, then vanished, like a held note you only realize afterward, had been keeping the room in one piece. I did not like the silence that followed. It opened space for other noises to be promoted. From somewhere in the crown seam, a faint whistle began. Not the brazen shriek of a major leak, the pressurization numbers didn't budge, but the high thread of a tiny pressure argument at the edge of something new. Outflow closed a notch on its own as the controller did its honest best to keep the cabin paid. The packs brought their grown-up voice flow high for a beat, then normal. The airplane was managing an insult it wouldn't dignify by naming. We started down through FL 300 into air that wore weight easier. The headwind softened 20 more knots, and the EDR to our right blushed less murderous. The ridge fell behind us, bored with our capacity for drama. The whistle in the seam remained, a single hair caught in a door. "Mask?" the captain asked for the third time. "Stand by," I said, and hated the word. My eyes haunted the cabin alt digits. 7.6, 7.7, 7.6, happy liar numbers. DP 7.7. The leak, if it was a leak, was needlepoint, the kind you watch the way you watch a dam with a glass of water. We briefed speed for bumps and a slightly faster approach to keep the airplane taut. I called the purser. "We're diverting. Prepare the cabin when we call. For now, stay." She whispered, "Copy," and the whisper sounded like the rest of the airplane, which had invented a new verb, endure. The zip didn't come back. Click, click, click did. 3 tiny coin tosses somewhere overhead that meant either thermal or fatigue, or a plastic pin with an opinion. We filed them all under later and flew the plan. At FL 240, the sky forgave a little. The airplane stopped hissing its vowels and cleared its throat. The whistle thinned, then returned, thinner still, as if it were keeping pace with our hope. We called the field. They rolled equipment we didn't need yet, but wanted close. The captain set HUD symbology for a night that would behave. The autopilot was still in love with CMD. We let it love, and then the silence lifted its shirt and showed us a bruise. A dull thump passed through the crown like someone had knocked from the outside. Not impact. Oil can pop, the belly kind you get when temperature toys with aluminum. Except this was the roof, and the temperature hadn't changed in the last minute. And the sound had that hollow at the center some things get when they warn you nicely. Noted, the captain said, because you talk to airplanes by pretending you're writing them a letter. Noted, I said back, and flew the descent like the one job that makes the others possible. Get us to air where sound goes back to being boring. We were almost there. The sky did that mean thing it does when almost is your favorite word. It remembered it had one last gift. The ECAs burped a maint advisory, unhelpful, unspecific. The whistle bled into a susurrus, then stopped. The pressurization numbers never cracked their smile. The cabin fell so quiet, my ears had to invent a hum to stay sane. We crossed 10,000, sterile. We were closer to a runway than a riddle. The story could have ended here. It chose not to. Below 10, the airplane and I share a compact. It holds laws, I hold attention. The runway was a clean shard of ivory ahead, the ocean a black slate licking its edges. ATC vectored us to the ILS, wind 23018, runway 26. The FMA did its ceremony. LOC blue, LOC star, GS blue, GS star. AT hummed like a generator in another room. Auto Brake 3 sat armed and patient. The purser called only to say, "We're ready." She didn't add for whatever that means tonight, but the air did. The first odd pitch, tiny, the HUD ladder quivering as if a hand brushed it, synced with a new texture at my right temple. Not pressure, soundlessness that pressed back. The ridge had receded, the waves had not. Mountain rotor doesn't care about your runway selection. It has its own final approach. EDR to our right still showed pepper. Ahead, the scope was clean and useless because clear air makes its own ambushes. "Localizer captured," the captain said, and I wanted the words lacquered onto the night. I wanted ceremony to beat physics by tone. The whistle in the crown returned for a heartbeat, then pinched into silence. A thin crack appeared in the overhead headliner seam near 3L, not a jagged horror, just a hairline, the kind you'd miss in daylight and deny at midnight. When the airplane flexed, the hairline winked. "Panel," I said, because naming is both confession and spell. He nodded once. "We'll land before it decides to be more." Glide came alive. 1,000, stable. We were on rails that felt like breath held. The wind flickered 1922 and the auto-throttle massage thrust with a therapist's smugness. I briefed again, superstitious. If we get a pressurization caution or an unusual anything inside 500, we continue unless fumes or fire. You fly, I'll talk. "Copy," he said. "Picture is good. 500. I nudged a smidge of right rudder for the crosswind, cradled bank to keep drift honest. I could taste metal again, not the hot pennies of panic, the cold spoon of focus. The nose whispered now without moving. We were okay. We were okay. The cabin disagreed, not with screams, with weight shifting strange in the aisle, a murmur like sand in a tube. The purser, against orders and gravity, stood a millimeter, then thought better. The hairline at 3L widened the thickness of a fingernail, and then politely closed, like an eye that had reconsidered a blink. I watched it while looking forward. Pilots do that. 2 truths, 1 face, 400. A dogleg of gust hit from right rear. A shy push along the axis that makes your damper earn its pay. The autopilot stayed in. I stayed ahead of it. Then, I felt it before I saw it, the autopilot flickered disk for 0.2 and recaptured. No chime, barely a hiccup, but the bars wobbled 1 degree like a hand had breathed on them. "I have it," the captain said without drama. He did. I put my hands on the levers like amen. 300. Minimums. Continue. The runway was a white bone under a black skin. The ocean's breath crossed it in set waves. The airplane moaned low in the ribs, a sound old airplanes make in winter, except this airframe was young, and the sound had that human center you pretend you didn't hear on tape. The side tone, missing since cruise, came back, not a word, a shape in the ears, hold. The crown seam answered with a soft cough, the sound drywall makes when your upstairs neighbor dances. The cabin alt stayed loyal, 7.6. The DP declined like a gentleman as we took air outside. I kept the picture, 200. Crosswind flirts with 22. I asked the land to be still by looking at it hard. It tried. The ELT, God help me, found enough myth to beep inside the cabin for a half-second like a judge clearing his throat. The purser flinched. I did not, on purpose. The zip ran again, a quick skip across the crown. Something above 35 tugged and let go. I imagined stringers flexing, tear straps muttering their one job. Not today, not today, I begged back. 100, land. I felt the flare cue rise toward me like a calm stare. The captain steadied pitch with a surgeon's disrespect for nerves. Retard. Idle. The wind teased. The G wrote a modest letter. For a bad second, I thought the hairline would argue its case with daylight. It didn't. A touchdown that taught the runway manners. Not a greaser, not a pounder. Just arrived. Spoilers deployed, reversers whispered. Auto brake 3 did what it says on the tin. The 787 shivered its long joy through the gear the way jets do when the hard part is suddenly simple. We rolled past the first high speed. The purser asked permission to breathe with silence. I granted it with the same. At 70 knots, the airplane exhaled the last bar of a song I did not like, but had learned to hum. Then it did the single cruel thing it had left. It let the crown seam sigh open the thickness of a credit card and then settle. A set noise, a house leaning after a storm. The pressurization did not notice. My spine did. "We're clear," the captain said at 60, because words matter. I called manual brakes, reversers stowed, auto brake disarmed. The runway lights slid by the way you want them to, bored. We were alive inside an airframe that had invented whispering. On the taxi in, ops came on with paperwork voices and good intentions. Equipment, gate, medic for the eyebrow, PR for the statement no one wants. I answered them professional and brief. The purser said Noah, as if she'd found a coin under a seat. I said, "I'm here because inventory must be taken in layers. Souls first, structure second." At the gate, when the seatbelts pinged, the hairline at 3L gave up 1 grain of dust. Not insulation, not fiberglass. Something like a flake of paint that had learned to be metal and drifted down. I caught it. It was cold. It rang my fingernail with a note I hope never to hear again. Maintenance met us with ladders and hands. They said the sentence that lives at the edge of religion and engineering. We don't see anything, but we hear what you heard. We wrote our ASRs without poetry. Mountain wave, rotor, moderate to severe, autos handled, AP blip, cabin seam, sound near 3L, pressurization stable, minor injuries divert, landed uneventfully. The words were correct and wrong. There was nothing in the form for air that learns your name, for soundlessness with weight, for a zip that keeps time. In the hotel, the vent behaved like plastic, not like a mouth. I slept 6 minutes at a time. In one of them, I dreamed the airplane asking me for a vector, not to a runway, to a bone. We were not out of the storm. We were in its memory, and memory, I have learned, has weather. 12 hours later, they asked if I'd reposition the same airframe to base. Different captain, Maria Klein. Quiet eyes, wrists like metronomes. Same winter map, same ridge with its backup. Maintenance had pulled sidewalls, peered into the crown, run a pressurization leak check, tight as a drum. They chalk-lined the headliner seam by 3L and dotted it with witness marks like freckles. Marta, the tech from a different life, taped a voice recorder inside the PSU bay. If it sings, she said, we'll have the key. Dispatch filed a route that bent farther west over water before turning inland. The EDR plots still splotched purples and bruise greens over the spine. Our card wore extra ink. Turb 1, speed margin, no cabin service, belts hard on, divert at first lie. I read it like scripture I half believed. Climb was ordinary in the way a clean sheet fools you. Lanav, Vnav, PTH, CMD led us to FL 370, then we asked down to FL 350 before the ridge, refusing the number that had learned our names. The purser, same one, did her walk with empty hands, a ghost of service. Isle feels fine, she said. For now, we both heard the last two words. At the edge of the water-to-land turn, the jet sharpened. Headwind, 160, 175. The airplane put its shoulders up. We slid 10 left preemptively, like stepping off a sidewalk before a truck splashes. The weather radar had nothing to give. WX plus T sterile, tilt low, all art, no paint. The cabin lights were mood dim, a dusk we carried with us. The first hint was a taste, ozone and cold aluminum, except this fuselage is composite. Then the side tone opened its throat, the way vents do when they forget their day job. Below, not the command from last night, more like a proposal. Mireya asked for FL 330, CPDLC blessed us. As we took the step, something in the crown made that long oil can sigh again, except this time it ended with a zip like a fingernail across fabric. I watched the chalk freckles by 3L in the overhead reflection. They held. The rotor had moved house. Instead of the sawtooth vertical G, we got torsion. The tail nudged, the nose demurred, the yaw damper wrote a stern paragraph and signed it. Ma 1.6 G, then 0.3, modest, but the frequency went wrong, short, rude hits that made your molars narrate. Mireya's hands went to the yoke with that small extra preload we learn in bad summers. The auto throttle hunted in millimeters. I guarded speed with Turb 1 like a prayer mat. The recorder in the PSU caught it first. I heard it after, a whistle thin as thread, on-off with the bumps as if the seam were practicing a language. The pressurization stayed saintly, DP steady, cab alt 7.6, outflow a metronome, no ECAM ICAS drama, only sound. Say it, Mireya said, eyes forward. Panel seam making noise, I said. Pressurization normal. Saying normal felt like writing it on water. We stepped again, FL 310 now, into heavier air. The rotor backed off the throttle. The airplane thawed enough for people to breathe like mammals again. The whistle thinned but refused to quit. The purser called, "Too queasy, no injuries. Isle feels flat." She meant not leaning. Good. We aimed for the coast field that had saved us once. Vectors to star, winds quartering, nothing baroque. At FL 240, the chalk freckles by 3L still looked smug in the reflection. I let myself smile. The sky hates smiles. Bang, not metal tearing, an overhead bin arm somewhere aft cammed and quit. A suitcase's center of gravity remembered childhood. A passenger yelped and then apologized to the universe. The purser. Secured. The recorder in the crown said nothing, which is how I learned to dread silence more than noise. We briefed an early flap schedule to keep the wing talking sticky, not slick. Auto brake 3, reverses planned idle then as needed, no heroics. Mireya flew like the runway was a contract. The side tone came once more, not a word, just a shape. Hold. We held. 1,000 stable, 500, crosswind flirt, minimums, continue, flare. The airplane arrived. On rollout, at 70, the seam by 3L exhaled a pft, the world's smallest surrender, and one chalk dot smudged itself. The cab alt didn't flinch. My spine did. At the stand, maintenance men with hearts like calipers opened the crown. Insulation tidy, wiring looms snug, interior retainers a shade polished where they should be matte. Fretting, one said, unhappy, not structure. He drew a circle with a Sharpie around a plastic tongue. Replace this. The recorder? It had captured breath. Not air through a hole, infrasound. Numbers the human earboxes as ominous. Company asked if we could take her home tonight. Mireia looked at me. I looked at the chalk smudge. Yes, we said, because fear makes brave men procedural. We reset the chalk. We went back out. Night again. Same ridge shouldered under stars. Same jet muscling the map. Same airplane pretending it had never learned to sigh. We pushed to FL through 30 early and planned FL 300 before the mountains, carving a canyon of air between purple EDR islands. The trop lines sagged like wet rope. I felt watched by contour lines. We crossed from water to land, and the ram air hiss changed vowel. Headwind 170. Mireia set Turb N1, belt sign a lit religion. Hands on, she said. And we both took a little bite of the yoke, the kind of pressure that tells the automatics we still speak dialect human. The first rotor hit like a sideways shove in a crowded train, yaw, not heave, and the damper wrote longhand to keep the nose housebroken. 1.7, 0.3 G, untidy. The PSU recorder woke and the seam by 3L answered with piano wire whistling in tiny, intermittent phrases. Pressurization metrics remained a liar's smile. The chalk dots didn't move. Yet. We asked 10 left. ATC obliged, with a voice that belonged to a warm room. The EDR plot to our right went eggplant, to our left bruise yellow. We threaded olive. Below, the ridge wrote its black grammar. Parallel spines and the implied lee waves strung downwind like stadium stairs. I could feel the standing wave lift and the rotor drop without instruments, the way you feel music through a wall. Speed intervene, Mireia said, and I shaved a knot. AT caressed back. The airplane flexed like a bow. The overhead clicked a polite no. Then the sky got serious. Plus 2.1 G, a fast 0.6, then plus 2.3 with a lateral pop that rattled the cutlery into percussion. A bin near 36 belched its latch and spat a duffel into a startled lap. No screaming, only those choked laughs people make when they aren't sure which god is on shift. The purser. Secured, 2 bruises. Mireia. Copy. Me. Counting the beats between hits because a pattern had crept into the chaos. The infrasound rose a half-second before each strike, like a drummer's count-in. I flew that ghost metronome, preload, brace, breathe, while the automatics did their polished math. We were a band again. The sky our bad audience. At FL 310, the crown made the long oil cans sigh and did not zip. The chalk freckles held. Then the airplane threw us a new riddle. The overspeed clacker coughed one syllable even as we were below our red line. Gust spike. I eased thrust a hair. The buffet band stayed a rumor. The ridge was bored with humbling us. It wanted trickery. The side tone wrote a single shape in my ear. Below. We asked FL 290. Stand by, said CPDLC, another voice already in the stack. The airplane took one more shove to make its case. I added bank into the gust like a head tilted against wind. Mireia said nothing. Her hands were a song I knew by heart. FL 290, approved. The air thickened, the rotors shorter, the frequency slower. For 10 minutes we played the downbeat game and won. Preload on the infrasound's cue, let LAF pay the tabs, keep speed honest. The seam by 3L whistled less, then more, then less, as if embarrassed. Cabin? I asked. Quiet, the purser said, awe in it. The aisle feels level. We hung a right toward ocean. Then the thing I'd been dreading, silence. The vents stopped singing. The PSU recorder would later show a flat line where the ominous low note had lived. My skin missed it the way you miss a handrail on a dark stair. The next hit came without count-in, a clean punch that spiked plus 2.4, tossed a cup into the aisle and a prayer into the air. I flew late. The airplane forgave. The ridge did not. Divert, Mireia said. Again without sermon. Same coastal field, same ILS, same contract with land. We slid into the star with dirty wings early. Auto brake 3, flaps by the book, +1. The seam by 3L let out a single puffed as if to mark attendance. Cab Alt 7.6, ZP smooth. It is possible to be lied to benevolently. 1000 stable. The wind flickered, the runway held. 500. The ELT in the cabin dared a half beep like a judge clearing his throat, and then had the grace to shut up. Minimums. Continue. Flare. We arrived with a firmness that made tires honest and souls stay in their seats. On rollout at 70, the chalk at 3L smudged again, half a freckle gone. Maintenance would later swap the retainer, talk the world, and call it placarded good. They would not have a box to check for infrasound as forecast, or aisle feels narrow, or air says below. Back at stand, Mireia signed the book. Modsev Cat Rotor, AP momentary cabinet latch release, headliner noise near 3L, pressurization normal, uneventful landing. Correct words. Wrong story. In the crew van, the driver asked how the weather was up there. Learning, I said, and he laughed like I'd told a joke. I stared at my hands. They were still doing the tiny preload against a turbulence no longer present. We weren't torn apart. Not tonight. But the seam had learned our names, and the air had learned our timing, and somewhere past the ridge, a bigger door waited with its hand on the knob. The engineers showed up with NDI wands and faces that don't write fiction. Ultrasound along the crown near 3L read clean until a thumbnail of ambiguity, a kiss bond shadow, where a panel tongue meets a retainer. Not structure, they said. Interior. Replace the retainer, retorque, sign here. They chalked the seam again, freckles precise as a lie detector. I nodded like a believer and felt like a man shaking hands with a levy. Ops added a meteorologist with a laptop full of verbs. You threaded a trapped Lee wave train, she said, drawing scorer numbers like hexes. Strong stratospheric intrusion dropped the trop, cranked vertical shear, stacked rotors. Forecasts called EDR, 0.40-60, real world likely 70 plus in packets. The map looked like a spine with teeth. You can route west, she added, but the standing wave has reached tonight. Dispatch wanted the jet home. We'll paint you a tunnel, the planner said, finger tracing olive corridors between purple EDR islands. The tunnel kinked over the same ridge that learned our names. My captain, Mireia, read the card twice, then a third time, then looked at me. Procedural bravery only, she said. No speeches. Maintenance swapped the retainer and photographed their work like a wedding. Marta slid a fresh PSU recorder behind the headliner. If it sings, we'll know the key, she said. Same joke, different day. We launched heavy on fuel and humility. FL 330 first, FL 300 before land, Turb N1 early, seatbelts a lit religion. The cabin was mood dim, carts stayed jailed. Mireia's wrists kept the beat on the yoke, light preload to talk human to LAF, and the yaw damper. I watched the trop lines sag on the tablet like wet rope. The ridge was black grammar ahead. Offshore, the jet grabbed us by the collar, headwind 170. And the vents took that ozone coin note I can't wash from memory. The side tone opened, not with words, with shape. Hold below. We stepped to FL 300. The first rotor nipped, bar 16 0.3 G, and moved on, a stray dog testing ankles. The PSU recorder woke. The seam at 3L answered with violin string whispers, thin, discontinuous. Cabin Alt 7.6, DP 7.8, outflow civilized. The chalk dots didn't twitch. I wanted to love those dots. I didn't. The meteorologist's tunnel kinked left over ocean and we followed, shaving 10 left when the EDR pepper darkened to eggplant over land. The sky, insulted, pushed back sideways, torsion first, then heave, and the airplane did math. LAF flex, AT millimeters, V-nav, PTH, stubborn as doctrine. The overspeed clacker coughed a single fake syllable. We bled marker hair and lived. Say it, Mireia said without glancing up. Panel seam voicing, I answered. Pressurization nominal. The word nominal tasted like paper. The infrasound returned with a mercy I hate admitting, a half-second count-in before each slap. I flew the ghost metronome, preload, breathe, let the software pay the checks, while the cabin held its breath like pews in a storm. The purser reported queasy and quiet, no injuries, no leaning aisle. Good news, felt loaned, then silence. The vents killed their low hymn. The recorder would later show a flat line. In the moment, all I felt was a handrail gone from a dark stair. The next hit came clean, without count-in, plow 2.2 with a sideways nudge. And I flew late. Forgiven, not forgotten. We diverted on plan. Same coastal field, same ILS. Auto brake 3, early flaps to keep the wings sticky, 1,000 stable. The hairline at 3L stayed hairline, the chalk freckles held. The ELT swallowed its urge to clear its throat. Flare, idle, spoilers, rolled. At 70, the seam exhaled the smallest puffed and 1 dot smudged a sigh. Maintenance would call it fretting, not fear. Ops would call it uneventful. My spine called it a witness mark I could feel. Back in the room, the vent behaved like plastic. Sleep came in 6-minute bites. Between them, I saw the ridge bending, not the air, the map bending, making a tunnel that curved into us no matter where we placed it. Some nights, the sky doesn't want a plan. It wants a name. Ours, preferably. We weren't torn apart. We were being learned. The difference is time and whether you believe Freckles. They sold the next leg as easy. Lighter fuel, earlier turn west, FL 300 cap, same meteorologist on speed dial. The ridge didn't RSVP. Mireia and I walked the airframe with maintenance, hands on panels, eyes on chalk. 3L looked immaculate, smug even. The PSU recorder blinked armed. The purser touched every latch like a rosary. If it leans, she said, I sit. Climb was velvet, the kind that makes you forget metal has memories. We leveled at FL 300 before landfall, turbine 1 in, belts on. The trop line on the tablet bowed, but not as dramatically. Pi reps upstream, mod 320, smooth 300, OCNL rotors west. I allowed my shoulders 1 millimeter of hope. The ridge heard it. The first shove was yaw, that crowded train bump, a 1.5 and a sideways lick. The damper wrote longhand, the side tone breathed hold, and I did, preloading the yoke, matching Mireia's pressure, letting LAF sing harmony. The PSU recorder woke, and the seam at 3L replied with a thin wire whistle. Cab Alt 7.6, DP 7.8, all saints present. The chalk dots held. I inhaled like a man stealing air from his future. Then the count-in died again. I learned what terror prefers, surprises, plus 2.4 with a lateral crack that sent 2 cups and a prayer airborne. I flew late. The airplane forgave. The ridge didn't. 10 left, Mireia asked. Approved. The EDR island slid right on the screen. Eggplant to our 3 o'clock, olive ahead. And the sky said no with a new trick, stacked rotors. Hit, half beat, like climbing a broken staircase. I matched the rhythm until it changed again, malicious jazz. The overspeed clacker coughed its single hematoma syllable. We shaved Mach to buy margin. Somewhere aft, a latch thought about quitting and then didn't, perhaps because the purser was mouthing warnings at gravity. The seam by 3L made its long oil can sigh and stopped clean. No zip. The recorder would later show a notch at 17 hertz rising and falling like a chest. I felt it as pressure without numbers. The pressurization stayed salon calm. I wanted it to blink just once to tell the truth. It didn't. We asked FL 280 to bury ourselves in denser standby, Datalink said. Another crew in the stack also bargaining with physics. The side tone didn't say below this time. It said nothing, which was worse. The hit that followed wasn't the biggest, just rude. A torsion slap that wrote a paragraph in the rudder and a footnote in my molars. One overhead bin near 35 cammed and then relatched itself with a mercy click. Someone laughed the hysterical kind and then cried the private kind. The purser, seated, bruise only. Mireia. Copy. Me. counting invisible drums that stopped mid-measure. We were approved to FL 280. The air thickened, the rotors shortened, the wire whistle thinned. For a full minute, we lived. Then the sky remembered it had claws. A clean thump through the crown, like a knuckle on a table, followed by a poof so small you could call it imagination. Cab Alt 7.6, 7.7, 7.6. I stared the digits down. The outflow trimmed a hair like a butler closing a door gently. The chalk freckles by 3L, in the reflection, held smug court. Panel, I said, because if I stopped naming, I'd start praying. We're landing, Mireia said, already turning the star in her head into a promise. Vectors. ILS, same coastal bone. Auto brake 3, early flaps, no heroics. The side tone breathed one more shape. Hold. We held. 1,000. Stable. The ocean blew a crosswind in bars. 500. The ELT in the cabin dared a half beep and swallowed it. The seam stayed hairline. Minimums. Continue. Flare. Idle. Spoilers arrived. At 70, the seam exhaled the now familiar pft, smaller, almost shy, and one chalk dot blurred. Maintenance chalked it up, literally, to fretting against the new retainer. Ops called the leg uneventful. My hands kept the tiny preload long after the engine spooled down. Back on stand, the meteorologist sent a map with new teeth. Jet coupling with secondary wave. EDR pockets drifting seaward, she wrote. Tomorrow worse. Tomorrow has a way of arriving on schedule. I lay in a hotel that smelled like carpet and mercy and listened to the vent not sing. The silence felt like a loaded spring. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the tunnel we kept painting had learned to curve, and a seam no thicker than a story was practicing a word it hadn't said yet. Tear. Dispatch called it a window. The meteorologist called it a tunnel with teeth. We briefed like penitents. Retainer by 3L replaced. Seam chalked with witness dots. PSU recorder armed. FL 300 cap. Turb N1. Belts locked. No service. Divert at first lie. Captain Mireia tapped the plate above her HUD as if to wake the bones. I told the purser, if the isle feels anything, you sit. She didn't laugh. Offshore, the jet already had a hand on our collar, headwind 175. And the vents found their old ozone coin taste. Side tone shaped two ideas, hold and below. We took FL 290 before land. The first rotor was a rude curtsy, but 1.6 and 0.3 G, and the yaw damper wrote a paragraph to keep the nose housebroken. Cab Alt 7.6, DP 7.8, chalk dots, smug, recorder awake. Then the count-in died. The hit came clean, pulse 2.3 with torsion, cups lifted, a prayer too. I flew late, and the airplane forgave us on credit. 10 left, Mireia asked. Approved. The EDR island slid right. The sky rearranged its trap. The seam by 3L gave the long oil can sigh, and new followed it with a rip like cloth. Not metal shriek, canvas torn in a cathedral. The hairline widened to credit card, then politely closed, like an eye that had changed its mind. Cab Alt 7.6, 7.7. I kept my voice flat. Panel voicing, press normal. Saying normal is a spell you cast for one more minute. The vent's infrasound vanished. That silence pressed the cabin like a palm. The next shove arrived without mercy. Plow 2.5, a side lick, 0.6, a bin at 36 cammed and relatched out of pride. The purser whispered, the aisle leans. Sit, I said. She did. Then the seams stopped being manners. The rip returned longer. A zipper unlearning its job. Cab Alt 7.8, 8.1, 8.6. Cabin Alt flashed amber for a frame, then behaved, the outflow easing shut like a careful butler. We were still sealed. The airplane was paying with pack and valve and hope. Masks? Mireia asked. My jaw said yes, the page said stand by. The rotor stacked. Hit, half beat, hit, our infrasound metronome gone, timing stolen. I preloaded blind, Mireia matched, LAF flexed, the auto throttle hunted millimeters. We stole seconds from the ridge and spent them on the seam. Cab Alt 8.9. 9.3. The recorder would later draw a 17 Hz hill climbing. The rip took a breath and ran. Chalk freckles smudged. The whisper you feel in your molars turned into a threaded hiss above 3L. Not explosive. An argument. Cab Alti stayed under the line by decimal. "Mayday," Mireia said before I could, voice level. "Severe turbulence. Possible crown panel compromise. Requesting immediate descent and vectors." ATC, blessed voice in a warm room, cleared down and direct. We rolled idle and speed intervene, boards armed but shy in bumps. The airplane took VS 2500 like a vow. Rotor said no with a slap. We rode it without poetry. Masks deployed in the cabin on a brownout of fear and physics. The purser reported oxygen flowing. Seated, voice tinny through plastic. Cab Alt 10.21. 10.6. The seam gave a final opinion, a rending I will hear under every roof forever. And the hiss became a note, not a roar, a flute under the storm. The numbers remained nearly honest. The structure said, "Choose." "We continue down," Mireia said, and I loved her for the plural. AP disc flickered, and we flew us. Preload, trim, human, PL 2.2, Zoo jumped 5. The ridge fell astern, an inch on the ND and a mile in my chest. Then the ceiling learned a new word, not rip. Tier. It said it in sound. The cabin took the syllable and made it weather. And for a heartbeat long enough to write a life into, everything was wind. The tapes will show data. My bones remember that. I met what was left of the night as numbers first. FDR. A clean machine doing calculus in a dirty sky, LAF saturating, yaw damper eloquent, AP momentary, human hands steady. DP and Cabalt inside, limits until they weren't by whispers, not shouts. CVR, voices level, one Mayday, a purser's oxygened calm, and then a sound my lab failed to name. Between rip and hiss, a seam learning fluency. The airframe did not burst. It unzipped a crown headliner seam near 3L, a retainer fretted thin by rotor-driven micro-motion. Interior, not primary structure, until turbulence made interior into load path. With rotor packets stacking, EDR pockets modeled at 7.9, the shell took additive insults, PAL 2.5, 0.6 cycles, torsion, lateral pops. The seam's whistle was pressure arguing at the smallest edge. The PSU recorder caught 17 Hz, rising before each major hit. The infrasound count in your FO learned to fly. What tore the plane apart was not cinematic. It was cumulative. A panel tongue migrated, a retainer lost bite. The headliner gap became a slot that let flow lift insulation and redistribute cabin air. Pressurization stayed nominal until Cab Alt crept past 10.6. Masks dropped by logic, not drama. The crew initiated emergency descent inside a standing wave train that didn't honor procedure. Final insult, a stacked rotor struck as AP briefly disc. Human hands caught it. The seam uttered tear, and for a blink, flow made language. No primary frames failed. No explosive decompression. Yet what the passengers felt, and what the title will claim, was a plane torn. The interior becoming exterior in sound and intent, the cabin turned to wind. Recommendations, written without mythology, rotor literacy, operational forecasting must include Lee-wave packet stacking and infrasound signatures. Publish EDR ceilings and variants, not means. Training. Teach crews to preload controls to the ghost count-in and to treat silence as loss of warning. Interior retention. Redesign crown retainers and PSU interfaces to tolerate high-frequency torsion. Instrument seams above 3L fleet-wide. Procedural descent. Codified Turb N1. Early flaps, no heroics in rotor corridors. Empower divert at first lie. I visited the airplane under bright hangar honesty. Chalk freckles ringed 3L, 2 were smudged into commas. I touched the retainer that had learned to speak. It was cold. It made no sound. Machines keep their ghosts for the next storm. Families ask me the question without syllables. Was it avoidable? Yes, by never crossing mountains in winter. No, because air is a country and we live there. What I can give them is a shape, witness marks in chalk, a sound at 17 hertz that means brace, a cockpit that chose plural verbs, a cabin that ended the way good landings do, arrived. When I close my eyes, I hear 2 words through the headliner of memory. Hold, below. And a third only at the end, completed. The signature the sky denies and cruise right anyway. If this story put you in the jump seat, tap like, subscribe to the story Beyond the Impact, and share it with someone who argues weather with spreadsheets.